Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Austin Kippes. Did I say that right?
It's Kippes.
Kippes? Okay, Austin Kippes. So I got in touch with Austin through Facebook. I have recently been posting invitations to have discussions or debates on various topics on Facebook. And Austin saw one of those and replied and was interested in having a conversation. So here we are doing it. And our topic is at least going to start on politics, capitalism, something in that sphere. And maybe it'll go elsewhere, we'll see, but at least that's where we're going to start. So before we get into that topic, let me just ask you, Austin, if you could just tell us a little about yourself. And after that, I'm interested in what your views are on politics.
Yes, so I'm a grad student in a PhD program in philosophy at Binghamton University. I have a background in history. I have a degree in history, so I've always been really interested in especially modern recent history, imperialism, things involving the nature of the state, and generally I study contemporary social and political philosophy. As far as, so I guess I'd like to say in relation to that, I guess one of my concerns is the relationship between like theory and practice in politics and how to bring about, I guess, a more, how can you actually have progress? And that brings me to, I guess, one of the big problems which I see is capitalism. Capitalism is a word which can apply to many things. So, there's the kind of economics of capitalism, there's culture related to capitalism, and so on. I guess I'll just say in terms of the historical aspect of it, I view capitalism as a system which, at the base, revolves around a system of production of wage laborers and a class of people who own property, which the people go on to work for to make a living, and I view that in relation to certain like liberal principles of freedom, equality, and so on. I actually find it fascinating how capitalism has emerged alongside the liberal tradition with Enlightenment values when, like, for example, in that very system of having workers who are under the control in that private enterprise of the boss, it seems to me to be very, undemocratic because the workers don't have a say over what they make, how much it sells for, how much profit they would get for their wages, and so on. But I'm sure we could probably dispute the nature that I've just described of that enterprise.
Okay, so you have so you're opposed to capitalism, at least now, because you don't think it's democratic, or the laborers aren't treated fairly. And we can talk about some of that. I'm curious a little about your intellectual history. Did you always hold this view of capitalism, or did you used to have a more favorable view of it, or what?
Yeah, I would say first, one criticism would be the exploitative nature, I guess, and potentially unjust nature of capitalism. But the other one is, I could as well talk about, is the more ontological critique of capitalism, that there are like internal contradictions. So there are those two, I would say, positions that I don't think one by itself would be a good enough critique of the system. But yeah, I originally was in favor of capitalism when I first coming out of high school into college. but I was very distrustful of the state. I very much embraced the principles that you learn growing up in the United States of, freedom and the Declaration of Independence, no taxation without representation, things like that, that when I got into undergraduate school, I started learning more about, I guess I would say, not the problem of markets, but the problem of the state being used by more powerful capitalists. And that led me to then be very critical of capitalism, because I know some people like to say, well, that's crony capitalism, and they use the state to do that. But I find no period in the history of capitalism where the state hasn't been used by the benefit of a class of capitalists that have broken away, and then use the state to make it more difficult for like small businesses to compete, and then they just grab a greater share of the market. And so I quickly realized then, one, that capitalism was intimately connected with the state, and then two, I turned away as well from markets as a source of I guess a source of grounding for society, because many things which I love, if they were, I think, run by market forces, wouldn't survive, or they wouldn't survive in the way I think they should, like education, for example.
Okay. I think it is common that when people go to university, they move leftward, which I guess it's not very surprising, because universities, I mean, the professors there, I think, are far in the majority, they're on the political left, and they oppose capitalism. So I don't think it's very surprising that a lot of students, once they're exposed to academia, they make a move towards the left. But that's just kind of a sociological point. It's not really. So let's get into the more of the substance here. So you said you have an ontological sort of critique of capitalism, where you think it has some kind of internal contradictions, but then there's another. What was the other kind of critique?
The ethical critique of or I guess it would be kind of an ethical political critique of workers, not having there's no democratic process in the workforce, and that then workers are exploited. But I would just say that my experience is actually, like, I would distinguish the left from liberal. I would say most professors are liberal, but I wouldn't say they're left, because from my experience, at least, I have had very few which, I basically studied Marx almost on my own. So just from my experience, I don't think they would be anti-capitalists.
Okay. I think that might be an exception. I certainly had to study Rand on my own.
Mm-hmm.
She would almost never come up except in the form of a snide comment about her, and occasionally in a university classroom. Okay, so
I'm sorry, that was my same experience with anarchism, which really got me started in political philosophy. It was never really taught, except I had this one professor that eventually got fired, but I guess he was too, he didn't conform to the university standards. But so I've always, I think there are fringes on the left, and if you wanted to say the right, if Rand was more on the right, that don't get the representation that I think they might should.
Okay, so let's see. Should we start with the ethical critique or the ontological? Do you have a preference there?
I'll say I'd like the ontological, / historical, I think, critique.
Okay, so can you say a bit about what that critique is?
Yeah, well, one, it would be that capitalism is a historical phenomenon. It's not something natural. It emerges in, I don't have the exact, I want to say really around the 1500s, when you start getting, of course, spice traders and things like that, when the Europeans start going around the world, and you have people that bet on, whether ships are going to return or not, and if they return, they make a profit. And eventually, this merchant class, right, starts to gain enough wealth that they begin to threaten the power of the nobility, and you actually have then the movement of this merchant class that uses the state to like expropriate land from workers, like in England, for example, where it used to be the case that serfs could provide for their own subsistence because they could farm their own land. And then once that had been expropriated by the state, they were forced to go seek wage labor, right? A means of subsistence, not subsistence itself. And that kind of shifts the whole tide of then it's no longer the aristocracy that has political power, but it comes to be a new capitalist class. And so in that way, one problem I have with advocates of capitalism is, to me, they seem to naturalize it or take it given, because and they try to use certain values of like, well, like we could take like John Locke, for example, right? Like, oh, I just used my labor to like plant the tree, and so therefore all the things of the fruit of the tree, I own that property. But I would say the problem with capitalism is just historically it's a historical phenomenon. So that an entire society would revolve around a system where a minority of people own private property, which a majority of people need to work to make a living. That's something new. And so in that sense, before we get into whether or not ethically that's the best system, I think certainly historically, that doesn't mean it's something natural that when we try to say we want a better society than capitalism or to overcome it, it's not like we're, someone like Burke might try to argue you're going against nature, and anytime human beings try to construct a society, right, by going against human nature, it always fails. I think that would be a bad criticism to make against anti-capitalists.
Okay, this is somewhat new to me, actually, or not somewhat, but I don't recall hearing before this idea that capitalism is natural. And I mean, if you look at it historically, I would think maybe you'd think it's unnatural because it has so rarely existed. But maybe that view that it has rarely existed depends on what we mean by capitalism. So I don't think pure capitalism has ever existed, if that means a social system in which the government doesn't play any role except for stopping the initiation of force by having like a police force or an army or a court system to settle disputes peacefully instead of by force. If it's just a government restricted to those very minimal functions and not doing anything else, I don't think that has ever existed. But there have been governments that have come more and less close to that. And I think in particular, the United States government was founded on principles that very much suggested this kind of minimal state that I just described. The major flaw in it was slavery. That was an inconsistency with the spirit of the country, I think, and which I think that inconsistency had to be resolved eventually, and it was in the Civil War, and it became more consistent after that with the principles of capitalism and freedom. But that wasn't until a few centuries ago, yet there have been, civilization has been around for millennia. So if capitalism were natural, and if that means that it's going to naturally spring up, well, I think the historical record might suggest otherwise, at least if we're understanding capitalism in the sense that I described it. So I'll just pause there and see what you have to say.
Well, I would. You equated capitalism with freedom, or at least that they're associated. I would just like to hear if you could say more about that first.
Sure. Yeah. So the term free or freedom is going to be a contentious term in a discussion between capitalists and socialists or Marxists. I don't know if you consider yourself one of those or in the ballpark of one of those, but I know the term is used differently. So I think it's good to call attention to that and see if we can come to some kind of agreement on that, or at least make it clear that that's where the disagreement fundamentally lies. So the way I understand freedom, meaning political freedom, there are just different senses of the term free, but in the political sense of freedom, I mean by that the absence of the initiation of physical force. So just to give a simple example, if a mugger comes up to you on the street and threatens you, with a gun and says, "Give me your wallet," he's using force, or at least a threat of force, to get something from you. So in that case, he would be interfering with your freedom. If, however, an advertiser puts up a billboard and says, "Hey, buy my product, it's a great product," I don't think that's an infringement of your freedom. You're not being physically coerced to buy his product. You're being presented with an opportunity, which you have the free will, to use freedom in a different sense, to accept or reject. So I don't think advertising is coercive, though I think some, people in other places on the political spectrum would say that that's coercion and taking away people's freedom. I don't think it is. So basically, my understanding of freedom is it's the absence of the initiation of physical force.
Okay. Yes. Typically, I know people refer to like the non-aggression principle. I guess, I mean, to try to, there are a few points I want to respond with, but I guess to try to just focus on one, I'm unsure. I'm really trying, okay, we probably disagree about whether or not there's free will, but I'll still go down this path somewhat, because I'm unsure how one could think that you can have a consumer who can, rationally choose what is like the best product for them to buy, when an entire industry of advertising exists precisely to just persuade someone. Playing into all sorts of emotions, playing into dispositions that might have, appeal to one society in a given culture when someone grows up in it, and might not work in another society or given culture. I mean, I'm reminded of in Plato's Republic, I think he recognizes pretty well, I don't think we have to say poetry is bad, but I think he recognizes pretty well the role in the formation of, is he called the soul of someone, or just the entire kind of makeup of someone's, their dispositions, their habits, and so on. That there are all sorts of forces that, especially unconsciously, play a role in one's life in the formation of what they believe and what they're likely to do, such that I'm just not sure that that one could say that a society can exist where the individual is entirely separated from culture, the influence of culture, that an individual is entirely separated from even just the possibilities of what they might want to pursue, because in one society, it just might not, you might not even have the means to pursue a job in philosophy, being a professor or otherwise, right? So, and that might play into then what they might think the good life is, in a way that in another context, someone else would never even have the chance to think about, well, that is the kind of life I would like to live, because you don't have the kind of structure there that enables that. I don't know, I'm not sure if that quite applies to what you were talking about. But
I do think there is influence that can happen as a result of the environment or culture that you're exposed to, that you're raised in. But I would still want to draw a distinction between influence and coercion. So I think people can still, they're not, I mean, there's only one option when you're coerced, assuming that you don't have more power than the coercer. You have to go along with what he says. So if the mugger comes up to me with the gun, I'm basically at his mercy. I mean, I can try to fight him, but if he's got the gun, he's got the power, really. He determines what I'm going to do. But when an advertiser puts up that billboard, I don't have to buy his product. And many times I don't buy his product. And I don't think this is anything unique to me. Maybe I will be persuaded, maybe I'll be more likely to buy his product than if he hadn't put up the billboard. But I still have that choice. And I might even be thankful to him for presenting this opportunity to me, which I might not otherwise have known about. Whereas I'm not thankful to the mugger who just wants to take stuff from me. He's not offering me anything in return for my money. He just wants my money. At least the advertiser is trying to make a trade out of it and is appealing somehow to my cognitive faculties instead of just using brute force. So yes, there are influences, but I think the influences are very importantly different in the case of the influence, if we want to even call that, of a mugger, where it basically leaves you no choice or alternative, and he's using coercion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you say then, so in the case of the mugger, right, you said that like you don't really have a choice because it would be death, right, that you're presented with the alternative if you don't do what the mugger says. Is that right?
Death or maybe just injury.
Right.
But yeah, you suffer some kind of disvalue.
Right. So what would you say then about if we look at, for example, so if you take, if you say that in capitalism, there's a class of property owning people, and then there's a class of people who have to work for a wage in order to survive. We know that that class of people, the wage laborers, the workers, not all of them can become the boss. They can't all become the owner of businesses, because you need some people that then do the work, that get paid to do what the boss isn't going to do because they're managing, or they just have that property in their name. So that would seem then, well, one could say yes, but you could choose just not to go work for someone else, right? You can leave society or something like that, because it seems like in capitalism there are only that choice of you either become a worker or you become a boss. But we know it's impossible for that actually to apply to everyone, that only a few people can become the boss. And it would seem the alternative then is either death by refusing to then be a wage laborer, or you would have to leave society entirely, I guess, and go be a hermit. So why would that not be an example of like social coercion?
Well, so if you've got the choice to live one sort of life, I mean, you could revert to the level of being a hunter-gatherer, I suppose, at one extreme, basically go back to living like an animal. Or you could try to take advantage of the civilization that you were born into, where people no longer have to just be hunter-gatherers and expose themselves to all the kind of dangers and risks involved in that. And you can have a steady, reliable income to live on. And I think if you compare that to the hunter-gatherer sort of alternative, you're better off. And maybe you should be thankful and not resentful to the employer who allows you to live that kind of better off life than you would be able to live on your own. And maybe you can work your way up, and I think it does often happen. Maybe you start at a very low-paying job, but you can increase your station in life over time, earn better salary, get better wages. So I think I don't see coercion. I think I see opportunity in the sorts of jobs that business owners offer. They're making your life better than it otherwise would be if you had to survive on your own. So I don't see coercion there.
I I would take issue with the idea that they provide you opportunity, which would be better than if you had to live on your own, because I don't think we're actually like individuals that can break away from society. I think that the very fact that we are thrown into the society that we grow up in, where it just seems obvious that we just play by the rules of the system that exists, I think points to the reality that we're not free as like atomized individuals that can just freely choose to do whatever we want, but that there are necessarily pressures on us, and there are pressures which we can say are more egalitarian or more even democratic, and there are ones which are not. And so the problem I have with capitalism, and why I think it's socially coercive, is you don't really, I don't think, I would agree capitalism has, of course, raised the standard of living. It's definitely better than feudalism. No doubt it also brought with it political democracy, not economic democracy, but political democracy. Although whether or not that's necessary in capitalism works best in democracy, I think China begs to differ. Just if you look at just one, economic growth, and two, the rise in the standard of living for the Chinese, it would seem that actually capitalism would favor a anti-democratic political structure. But that aside, I'm just unsure. Then I don't see how the idea that you must sell yourself and take on a role of someone else. I must, like, if I have to make a living being a server, right? I have to put on the role of, hi, welcome to, Cheddar's Casual Cafe. Like, I am now this representative. And someone might say, well, yes, but if you don't like that, you can go do another job. Okay, I go do another job. But again, I have to kind of play a role that is provided for me by someone else. And if I don't like any of those roles, you might say again, yes, but you can start your own business. But not everyone can, because the very fact of starting your own business, typically to survive in a capitalist economy, requires workers, which means you can't do that without other people succumbing to that same position you're trying to run away from. And in that way, again, that's where I see that, like, there's no, the dream or the hope that you can rise above it. The fact that it can't work for everyone, to me, shows that it's socially coercive.
Okay. So I don't see why you can't start your own business. And I don't think you even need employees to work for you. You could be a one-person business. And you might not make much. So maybe part of the issue here is, what is your standard of living going to be? So you could have a business that allows you to become a billionaire, or you could have a business that allows you to, eat ramen noodles. And I think it's much more manageable to do the latter. I mean, I think a lot of people can start a business that allows them to survive and at some kind of standard of living. They're not necessarily going to be, living in a penthouse and driving a luxury car, but you can go sell taquitos on the street corner or whatever, and try to support yourself that way. And you don't need any employees to do that. So you have the choice, I think, to live that kind of very modest sort of life where you're in business for yourself. If you don't like any of the jobs that employers are offering to you and you think you could do better on your own, I think there is a way to do that.
I'm not sure that I buy that that's a real alternative that people would choose to, if they survive only on, ramen, like, I guess you can survive. It's not very nutritious. You're probably going to have health problems later on. But even then, like, if we take an example, a contemporary example of, say, Amazon, if I want to sell some kind of a product, I need a market. It's going to be difficult for me to just like stand on the side of the street and get enough people to buy my product. Amazon ends up, of course, having access to, I don't know, at least 1 billion consumers, I would think, if that's the case, right, then I'm much more likely to survive, and my business is much more likely to survive if I use Amazon as the middle person. The problem, though, with Amazon is they effectively are the market because they have the greatest access to consumers. If you then don't end up selling through Amazon, you're going to find it very difficult to stay in business because through access to more consumers, you can sell more product and therefore lower the price of your product. So on the one hand, you then seem to be almost required to like sell through Amazon to stay in business. But Amazon also, because they're the only person, they can then make demand. They have a de facto. I wouldn't say that they don't have a real monopoly, but they have a de facto monopoly, such that when you have to sell through Amazon, you have to raise your prices to the rate they want you to raise it to sell on their platform. And if you don't, then you get blacklisted. And what they do is they then sell their own products at a cheaper rate by forcing you to sell at a higher rate. Or sometimes like they reverse engineer your own product to then sell theirs at a cheaper rate than your own. So you end up going out of business anyways.
Okay, so so Amazon is makes it impossible for you to run your own business or to escape using them as a middleman of some sort if you are going to run your business. Okay, maybe for certain businesses, certain kinds of businesses, you're not going to succeed if you don't use Amazon. I'm not seeing though that implies any kind of coercion. I mean, they're offering you an amazing opportunity, I would think, to use their platform and reach those billions of people, which you would have no hope of reaching just on your own. So, I mean, what about that side of it? I mean, is it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. They do, and this is the kind of this is the I guess you could say the double aspect of capitalism, because again, there is this opportunity where capitalism provides you this with this innovation in Amazon, this ability to sell to more consumers. On the other hand, because Amazon is so successful, because they've become the de facto marketplace for online selling, you to then get onto their to be able to sell in their marketplace, you have to bend to their demands for maybe how much you have to sell your product for. And again, you can choose not to do that, but that means you're more likely to go out of business. So with the logic then of your business, which is to make typically in capitalism, right, the most amount of profit you can, you're then forced to sell through Amazon.
I'm not comfortable with that term forced. I mean, in a sense, you're always, well, here's a question. Are you always forced? Like, say I want to, I don't know, I want to buy something that's only 7-Eleven carries. Does that mean now I'm forced to buy from 7-Eleven, or should I look at it as they have the opportunity, they've given me this opportunity which I can't find anywhere else? Why look at it as they're forcing me rather than they're giving me an opportunity that no one else is? There's other sorts of examples like that. I guess anyone that only has one of a kind product, and I guess if you get fine-grained enough in your analysis of something, there's always going to be only one of a kind of something. Which might, like for example, burritos. I could get burritos from the grocery store. I could go to Taco Bell. I could go to a Mexican restaurant. But let's say I want burritos that are prepared by a certain chef who only works at this one restaurant. Now, is it right to say I'm forced to go to that restaurant because that's the only place that allows me to have burritos made by that chef? Or is it that I have the opportunity to get burritos made by that chef by going to this restaurant? So I think there's different ways you could look at it, and I'm not sure why it's right to, or if it's right to say you're being forced just because something offers the only opportunity that's out there.
I think with the examples you gave, I would not say that there's anything forced or coerced in that. Only it would be you would be forced if that product you need to buy is necessary for your survival. And we can think of this two ways. One, in the case I'm trying to talk about as a business owner, it would be for the survival of your business. If to survive, if for your business to survive, you need to buy a product, then I would see it as problematic that there's only one carrier of that product, which then can, of course, charge as much as they would like. And in a way, choose who stays in business and who doesn't. And then in the case of a person, it would be the same thing for me. Again, going back to survival, subsistence. If the source of your subsistence comes from only, if there's only, we'll say, one store, right, that sells you food, and that's it, right? I would say you're forced to buy from them because the alternative would be death unless you want to leave society again. And then I would say this is an example of social coercion moving to the bigger picture, because in the same way, the source of your subsistence comes from the capitalist class, so there's no escaping working for a capitalist to survive in capitalism as a worker. That's why I would say, again, it comes back to survival. That's when I would say it's coerced.
Okay. So maybe we should talk about what exactly survival means then, because it seems like there might be something off about saying, you can't survive without this Amazon business, or without using Amazon. What do you mean by survive? Does that mean just, you're somehow in existence? You're living at a certain wage level, or what does that mean exactly? Such that you would want to distinguish between the sorts of examples I gave and say, well, I guess the idea is you couldn't survive without the Amazon business, but you could survive without getting those special burritos. So therefore, you're not being forced in the burrito case, but you are being forced in the Amazon case. So I guess I don't see that you can't survive without the Amazon business. I mean, there's so many ways you could make a living. You could be, a ditch digger. You could go rake people's lawns. and survive in some sense. So why do you say that you couldn't survive without the Amazon business, and therefore it's force?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the sense of survival, in one way, I think it's, I guess I would say physiological, in the sense of, like, if I'm just gonna give like an orthodox Marxist argument as to why the working class is coerced by the capitalist class, because again, before we get to the business owner example, because in that case, you cannot survive in a capitalist society without, as a worker, without, working, selling your labor to a member of the capitalist class. In that, so I think in like literally you would starve, right? I mean, that's why, like, during the Great Depression, I mean, just when people didn't find work from capitalists, right, and they starved, one could say, I guess, like, well, you could go find some land that you could work and, like, grow food or otherwise, right, to still survive. But one problem is there's not really any there's no commons, right, anymore, where one could just go on the land and work it to survive. And we can look back on history, which shows us there is no commons anymore, precisely because it undermines the desire for the capitalist class to have a working class. Because if you can just go onto the commons, right, and cut down a tree for firewood, or you can go have a little plot of land where you grow some tomatoes or whatever else, right, you're less likely in need of working for someone else. Whereas if there is no commons where you can do that, well, it seems like your only alternative to live in society is to then go and sell your labor. So in that way, I would say that's in the case of survival, without getting into, I guess, the case of, like, the business owner and the survival of the business.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I just danced around the question, but
I'm not sure, but we can talk about what you just said, and then maybe we'll come back to the earlier point I had asked about why it's force in the Amazon case, but not in the special burrito case. Or, like, can't you survive without the Amazon job? Because aren't there other ways you can make a living, such as ditch digging or raking somebody's leaves? Why do you need that particular job with Amazon in order to survive? I don't see that you do. Maybe you
are you referring to the business owner having to sell through there, or just as a worker for Amazon?
Just whatever you had in mind when you said that in the Amazon case.
Yeah, I was just talking about a business owner who has to sell their product on Amazon's like platform.
Right. So the idea was that since that business owner can't sell his particular product successfully, at least, without using Amazon, therefore he's forced to use Amazon. And I wanted to know, well, why is he forced? Whereas you wouldn't say, I'm forced to go to this particular restaurant that has this particular chef. And then I think your answer was, well, because in the case of Amazon, you can't survive. But then I want to know, well, why do you say he can't survive? Can't he do other things than sell that particular product? Can't he go work somewhere else and do something different?
Right. In that case, I meant just survive as that business. So if I had, I don't know, Austin's wallets, I sold wallets. I'm saying that business, Austin's wallets, would not, or seemingly, because this typically is the case, could not survive without selling through Amazon, precisely because the access to consumers is too low, that then either the price of my wallets then would have to be too high, such that other people would just buy from other people who sell wallets for cheaper. Or I just, because I don't have access to enough consumers, I just couldn't make enough to actually just live. And so I would have to do something else than sell those wallets.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's infinite numbers of businesses that can't survive because they can't compete. I mean, if I want to make money as a basketball player, not going to happen. I can't compete with LeBron James and, you know, people at his level. So am I then forced to do something else? Does that mean I'm being coerced? No, I think it just means, you know, I should find another market where my skills they have more market value. So I don't think the fact that you can't have this particular business that you might want to do, unless you go to a certain platform, means you're being coerced. I think that just means you have to look elsewhere for opportunities. I mean, I don't think you have anyone owes you a certain opportunity, and if they don't give it to you, then you're being coerced. I think it's up to you to find opportunities that, you know, match with your skill set. And I guess it would be maybe coercive to, as I understand the term, to force others to give you opportunities just because you want them. So yeah, I guess I don't see that there's an issue of survival at stake. I mean, sure, you might not be able to survive in a particular way selling Austin's wallets without using Amazon, but there's many other ways you could survive.
There are, but I see the connection I'm trying to make, I see as relating to just business in general and the tendency of monopolization in capitalism and the problems that brings about, especially in relation to I I know these connections, I guess, are kind of loose, but I'm trying to draw these connections between what it takes for someone to try and make it as a business in relation to then what it takes for someone to just subsist in a capitalist society, and how in each of those cases, it seems like there is a minority of people, although in the case of the worker, it's not really people, it's a class that's still a minority of people in that class, that then control the ability, right? They don't give you subsistence because you can't live forever. They just give you means. And so you have to keep going back and using them. And in that way, I guess, I see it as coercion, but I understand your argument for why that's not, and as to why you can have opportunity. And this is, again, this is the thing about capitalism, where I would much rather be a worker or just anyone else in a capitalist society than I would in feudalism, because I can't leave the land, right? If I'm a serf, I'm tied to the land. As where, again, in capitalism, I do have the opportunity to go and if I don't want to be a server at a restaurant, which I've been a server, I don't like it, I hate it. I can go do something else, right? There are different job opportunities I can take, and I even might have the slight chance of succeeding as a business owner. But I think I don't know that I'd go so far as to say it's false opportunity, as I would say it is limited opportunity. Because again, I think, and this could bring me to like an argument about being alienated from like the product one produces as a worker, and then why the business place is not democratic. I guess those are some of the reasons why I still would disagree.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure what point you're disagreeing with right there.
What I would just say that the opportunity, I think, is okay. Well, I guess I'll try to quickly paint a picture of like what I would think opportunity, I guess, would be if I'm saying, I think this is a limited opportunity. One would be where, I know you said nobody owes you something. I would slightly disagree in that I think we as human beings necessarily come into contact with each other, and we have social relations, I think, are natural precisely because we rely on each other. We work through mutual aid, I think, such that if I grow up in a given society, like we're to say the United States, like right now, I think I would be owed a certain standard of education, because to survive in that society, it's demanded that you have a certain level of education. In that case, I would say then, well, we shouldn't allow only the wealthy to get the best education. We should open up opportunity for all who seek the education, regardless of their income, to get that education. So, for example, all higher education should be free at the point of service. So it should be socially paid for. I'm sure you probably would think, well, that would be an example of coercion if everybody would have to contribute to making that possible. But I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But that would be an example of a greater idea of opportunity than what capitalism gives, because I think it says you don't have to only do what your class enables you to do in that case.
Okay. So you get more opportunity if you have this non or anti-capitalist system, you're saying, because you might not be able to get education, for instance, in a capitalist system, whereas you would if it were paid for by maybe a socialist system. So doesn't that provide you with more opportunity? Maybe in some sense, but I think it's also, it's taking away opportunities. Like everyone who is paying for this education, who's being forced to pay for it, who wouldn't have voluntarily paid for it, all the opportunities that they had to spend their money on other things are gone now. And every social program does this. All the money that is taxed away from people into Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, and all the other things that tax dollars go to. There's lots and lots of opportunities that are being lost, and that's kind of the unseen cost. You see what happens, but you don't see what doesn't happen. But there's something called the broken window fallacy, where I don't know if you're familiar with that idea from economics, but
yes,
yeah, so all kinds of harm that is in the form of things that don't happen, that would have happened if you had the opportunity to spend your money in different ways. So, I mean, you can always point to benefits and opportunities that stealing people's stuff makes possible. I mean, look at all the opportunity that the mugger now has who took my wallet that he didn't have if he didn't take my wallet. Yeah, and look at the opportunities that I no longer have because he's taken my stuff. So I don't think it's enough to just point to the benefits without also looking at the costs of these programs.
Mm-hmm. I would, I think, yeah, I can respond with two points. One would be, I think what I'm trying to get at in the case of education is, I think like the system of education in the higher education in the United States, to me, runs the risk of perpetuating a kind of aristocratic system where, yes, there's such a thing as the government provides student loans to those who otherwise could not afford to get a higher education, but in return, they have to take on a lot of debt. And that debt is going to follow them throughout their life. Not everyone's going to be able to pay off the debt easily. And that, of course, is going to impact in a lot of ways what they do, whether like there's a problem with the millennial generation where they're not buying as many houses because they have a lot of student loan debt, and that's negatively impacting the economy. Or you could say, well, yes, but then they can just choose to not go into debt to get that higher education. Or they could go to a college where it costs less. The problem with that, I would say, though, is one, if they then just don't take out the loan and so they don't go to school, the rich person who probably is coming from a family who already had like a really good higher education, they're going to get to go then to that better school and then get a higher education. And then that means they're going to bring up their kids with an economic foundation to where their kids can then do the same thing. And then the person where you might say, well, yes, but the person who could go to the school that's less expensive, okay, but they would be getting a degree at a school which might be less prestigious, or it just might not be as good, which again then allows the rich person to, not because necessarily they are more qualified, but because they could just afford it to get the better education, which then again puts them in probably a greater, more likelihood of being the one that's, has kids that again then gets that higher education and gets the more powerful roles in society. And so I would say, I don't think it's forcing people to pay for something where they could have done something else. And so it takes away opportunity, because I think the poor person, they're actually net gain, I would say, for the poor person. And that's why, to the second point, I would ask you then, since you mentioned like Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, well, why do you think programs like that came about? And I would say, like Social Security, for example, was implemented because of social pressure, where there were enough people that just when they got old enough, they could not afford to survive. They got too old to work, and they didn't have enough money to live on. So they became a burden for society. Other people had to spend more money to take care of their parents that they could have been spending on other things, such that it would seem then that it's not exactly like society paying for like Social Security or something like that, that this is opportunity taken away from others. But it seems like this is something that is desired by people to give them kind of a basic, I hate the word safety net, but a basic, like, a floor to stand on, where they're not going to, fall into the dirt.
Yeah, I think it is desired by some people, but maybe by people who want to live as parasites off of other people rather than being responsible for themselves and supporting themselves. People who don't want to take personal responsibility. Maybe there are, I don't doubt there are many people like that, but I don't think it's right that people who don't want to take responsibility get to survive as parasites or leeches off of people who do. Now, maybe not everyone has that mentality. Maybe there are some people who, a very small minority, I think, who can't take care of themselves. Maybe people with Down syndrome, or they have some really bad handicap, and they're just, it's not that they're unwilling to support themselves, it's that they're really not able. But I think this is a tiny, tiny percentage of people. I'm guessing well under 1%. And I think that that very small minority of people is just going to have to rely on charity. And I think that's the morally right thing for the people in that position to do, is to rely on the goodwill of other people and not, hold a gun to the head of the people who are supporting them and say, I demand that you pay for my life because I can't support myself. No, I think they should be, they can seek out voluntary help. And I think that's the morally right thing to do. I forgot how I got into this now.
Well, can I ask you a question in answer to that? Why would you not want to instead of relying on like charity, right, of like relying on people giving money to like homeless people, right, to try to get them out of homelessness, why wouldn't you want to just end the reality of, for example, homelessness altogether, such that then it wouldn't be like a moral problem anymore. It would cease to even exist that someone would think about of homelessness.
I have nothing against getting rid of homelessness, provided it's done by a certain means. So what I oppose is me being forced at the point of a gun to give money to homeless people, and that's how we end the homeless problem. Rather, what I would like to see is these people be able to take care of themselves and not have to rely on help. So I think one way that this could be done is repeal minimum wage laws, abolish them. Don't set a wage at, a wage floor at $15 an hour or whatever. That's going to prevent a lot of these people who might have very low skills. Maybe all they can do is very basic manual labor, raking leaves or something that just isn't worth that much on the marketplace, but they could pay for their own lives. They could eat ramen noodles. They could survive if they were allowed to get these very low paying jobs. But minimum wage laws would prevent that. So I think that's one way that I would endorse of addressing a problem like homelessness. Free up the market.
I don't think that does in the problem, because again, if it has to rely on goodwill, then you always run the risk of that problem coming back. There's no way where you could actually have it cease to end. But in the case,
I don't think it has to rely on goodwill. I mean, I think
okay.
I suspected a large number of homeless people, I would think, at least in the United States, didn't have to be homeless. I mean, at least, I don't think it's easy. It's an easy position to end up in. I suspect it takes, in the typical case, years of bad decisions, and then you end up on the streets. But I don't think it's a hard thing to avoid. Now, I think it becomes harder with certain government policies that are put in place, like minimum wage. I think it might be harder to dig yourself out of a hole if you end up on the street as a result of making many, many bad decisions across many years. But at least in the vast majority of cases, I don't think people need goodwill. I think people can do it on their own.
I think the way I understand the disconnect between our perspectives here, I think that's run throughout this entire conversation. To me, I think stems from, and you can correct me, of course, you can state your own position better, but I think it seems to be a difference between conceiving of individuals in society as individuals, innately individuals, as where I think that the individual is a product of society. And I don't think that means that society, can just undermine the individual, but I think we are thrown into a world where we don't, we're not given like we don't have free will to just choose whatever it is we want. But some people are given, thrown into certain situations that they grow up in that choose or that narrow the possibilities or make greater opportunities for them, and so on, such that to try to link this back to what you said about minimum wage. Well, I would say yes. The reason why there's a minimum wage, why there are labor laws and things like that, is precisely because of social pressure. Because we know what it was like prior to labor laws, prior to minimum wage and other things like that, where workers, at the worst point, they were working 6 days a week, 16 hours a day. and they weren't getting a lot in return for their work. And it took serious effort on behalf of workers to pressure those private business owners to give them greater work standards, to pay them more, and to pressure the government to pass laws, right, to ensure that that happens. And I would say I don't see where that as a case would be a case of like the workers unfairly coercing the private owner to raise their standards or pay them more, because if the worker I just don't see that, because I don't see society as just individuals do whatever they want and who cares what the consequences are. Hopefully, they're good. I see it as society exists for the well-being of all individuals. I think that's why there is a society. And again, I'm sure you would agree, and that's why you think that there should be as much opportunity and no, like state interference. I just don't see that produces those results that you want or that you think would happen, which is precisely why I think through history there has been that social pressure from labor movements and things like that.
Yeah, so there has been some social pressure in that direction of creating things like minimum wage, but there's also social pressures in the opposite direction, which I'm trying to push on. So we are applying social pressures in opposite directions insofar as we're engaged in activism, because we have different views of what is the right role for the government to play. So yeah, I don't deny that there are social pressures that have led to the laws that we currently have, but I don't think that's reason to just accept them, given my view of human nature and ethics and what makes for a good political society. So yeah, I don't take the, I guess I don't see the, I'm not sure what point is being made by pointing out that there are social pressures for a certain position. So what does that establish? There are social pressures for the opposing position too.
Do you mean in favor of capital interests or?
Well, yeah, we just take like minimum wage, to use that example.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what it's meant to establish, that there are at some time in some societies there have been social pressures pushing for something like a minimum wage.
Mm-hmm. I see this as some evidence for the argument that one, I think it's just not like the government just like trying to like be authoritarian. I think too that this demonstrates that workers have a much greater role in making possible our society than I think they're given credit for, and which is why I think and I know you would disagree. I think you would not say that a worker is like it's less dignified than I don't know, maybe like a capitalist or whatever, if they're happy doing that and it serves their interests. But I find that typically workers are looked down on, and I think that it stems from a way in which you view society as individualistic, and where society is kind of a negative influence on the individual. And I think that society should exist for the betterment of all people, and that doesn't mean an equal outcome where everyone like has the same amount of money or whatever, but it means you actually do have the same amount of opportunities for everyone. And in that way, I see labor movements and social pressure, like I tried to describe, as being evidence of how this is, I think, deeply woven in then the interests of society and why it exists in the first place, which is for the community. It is, I think we're better off with, even if you might say it's coercion when they demand that a boss pays them more, and then it becomes law that the boss must pay them more. I say, like, well, I guess that's, I would say that's necessary coercion, because if people need these workers to make these products, then I think they should get, they should have a decent standard of living if that product is necessary for society.
They should get paid their fair share.
Yeah, I hate that that phrase though, but yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure how you determine what the fair share is.
I agree.
We could go on here, but I know you said you had about an hour. Do you want to wrap it up now, or what?
Yeah, we could probably wrap it up. I would just, I do want to say that this is where I think it definitely gets problematic in a certain reading of socialism or Marxism, which tries to like determine what wage like workers should make that would then be justified according to the relationship between like the product and the owner and so on. I think that stems just from a problem of wages in itself, and that's why I think, I don't even know if it's possible, but that's why I would think that a wageless society, such that maybe someone like Peter Kropotkin, the famous anarcho-communist, advocated, I think that would solve these problems. I don't know how you bring that about, whether it's feasible, but I do think that notion of a fair share, what is fair, I definitely think that's problematic. But in the context of the logic of the capitalist system, I don't think it's problematic. It's just like an abstract concept in itself. So yeah, that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I tend to think that it's not fair to force people. So if it involves forcing people, I doubt that it's a fair wage. But anyways, do you want any last words before we call this to an end?
I don't know. I mean, no, I enjoyed this. I think there is maybe a big movement and like a political awakening in the United States, for example, that is, I think these two different perspectives, I think, are really coming, I don't want to say coming into conflict with each other, but I think more and more the United States is turning less away from a kind of like a political neutralism, and it's really starting to consider, what ideology do we want to live by. And so I think we've discussed what I think that problem is.
Yeah, I think there might be a kind of increase in political consciousness over the years. Like, I think I hear capitalism versus socialism is an issue which 10 or 20 years ago, I don't think, I wasn't really aware of it much, but it seems to have become more of a popular thing to talk about. So maybe that's a sign that people are more so now considering these kinds of issues, which I think is, I guess that's good. I think there's important issues should be considered.
I agree.
But we're doing our part of that, so that's good. We're doing our fair share.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this, Austin.
Thank you.